Going on, man?
How's it going?
Not bad about yourself.
It's going. Yep.
Oh, still got the mustache?
Rocking the mustache. You're just getting it right for media day, I guess.
You a coffee guy?
No, I've never been into it.
Well, I guess you are still pretty young. Are you into any caffeine?
Nah, not really. I try not to be at least.
Ah, gotcha. Well, that did have me thinking. And I was curious if you wanted to start there, and what that regimen's like for you, or has been like in college, and kind of what they put you through. Because I know we think football is a lot of lifting, all that stuff, but I know you guys do all do just as much.
Yeah, it's a lot, especially when you get here. You're not really used to it. I lived in high school, but I think it's a big deal for some of those guys I've had on my team who come in and haven't really been in a weight program or anything like that. But it's a lot different. I've got here in my first year, I probably gained 10 pounds of muscle right off the rip, and I think since my freshman year, I've gained I think it was 17 pounds of muscle mass. So it's just a lot of stuff like that, and we have a good nutritionist, but we didn't get her till I was a sophomore. So my freshman year is kind of, just kind of eating what was smart, or at least what you think was smart for me. So that was kind of the main thing, really.
So what was the? Because what I assume you're a smart kid. Your dad's a coach. Like I assume he's feeding you the right stuff. But what was the difference then? From what was the change from what you thought was smart to what changed? I guess.
I just think having more access. There's free food all the time for us, that type of thing, and
Ooh, that
just
helped. Yeah.
taking advantage of it. And I think I never had taken really eating anything serious. Just kind of eating whatever was fine for me in high school, and just what was comfortable. And I think getting outside the comfort zone a little bit, like maybe eating more salads. And I never wanted to be a salad guy, but stuff like that, and eating a lot of protein, really, and just I think a big thing was how much energy that I was spending throughout the day. I had to eat things that were better for me, or I wasn't going to make it through the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and now I'd like to go back a bit because I think I always like to start with, um, you know, I know you played football, things like that, but I think you're always a basketball guy. When did that start for you as a kid?
My dad had put a little mini hoop in my room when I was 3, and me and him spent a lot of time in there. I don't have that quite memory of that, but shortly after, I remember playing and just being around it all the time. He was a coach my whole life, so I was just always around it and saw it. And I thought those guys he coached in high school were awesome, and those are your heroes when you're a little kid, and really just from there. And they never forced me to want to be a basketball player. Just kind of came with it as something I could do with my dad and my mom, and really just spend a lot of time on. And I spent a lot of time on it and got good at it, and loved it, really.
What was it you loved about it?
I just think the competition. My mom always tells people, if we lost, I would cry till I was probably in seventh grade is when I finally could stop and hold my emotions in. But when I was in like fourth grade, we had a thing where she was like, okay, if we lose, you're gonna get to the car before you cry. Like, we're not gonna cry in front of people. So that was kind of my thing, is just really competing and wanting to win everything. It didn't matter who we were playing, or if I was playing my cousins in the shed or something like that. I was trying to win no matter what.
And what was that like growing up with your dad as the coach? What was different about that compared to just the normal childhood, I guess.
It had a lot of ups, but at times there was, it's really hard. We would argue with each other, and it was, made some dinners awkward, things like that. But I think when I got older into high school, it was an easy transition. We had done it my whole life. Besides my freshman year was really the first break I had, and then he took over when I was a sophomore, and by then we were used to it, so it was no big deal. And I think as I got older, I just kind of started to appreciate what he had done more, instead of, thinking this guy's always trying to, make me mad, or things like that. I just started to, appreciate that the time he had spent with me and my teammates.
And the shooting, what? How were you able to grow that skill? We see it more and more in today's game, but you know that's new, and that's not something we see in this area very often. So, was that something you? How obviously you practiced it, but what were you able to do to make you that proficient?
That was a lot of time spent in the gym. My dad is a big form shooting guy, so that was really what I did a lot of was form shooting, and it's easy when you walk in the gym to just kids now. I'll walk in, maybe I'm having a camp or something. I'll walk in, they just want to go right to the 3-point line, and just because they see people do that, and that that's not really how it works, and not how I did it at all. I spent a bunch of time 3 feet from the rim, trying to make 200 of those every day, things like that. And, for me, it was easy too. I'm expending no energy just to stand there and form shoot. And then, the more I would do that, I would see the results. And it wasn't always easy when I was a kid because I wanted to kind of go out there and shoot. And my dad didn't really like it. So just kind of listening to him and things like that.
Well, that's what I was going to ask is how he felt, or in the beginning, I guess, when you started taking those shots that most coaches probably don't want their players taking.
I think it was fairly easy for him because he had seen how much time I put in and that I work on shots like that. But I do remember vividly one time in 7th grade, I took one that was a long ways out and I hadn't made one before, and he subbed me out, and that was kind of really the time he kind of decided good shot or bad shot. And after that, I don't remember thinking, that was a bad one, but I remember at the time thinking, he's right about that one. So that was really it. He just seen me take a lot of time, and I had great teammates too that saw how much time I spent in there, and they were accepting of it. And I couldn't have done what I did in high school without those guys.
When did you know you were good? Like, when did you know you could maybe take this thing to the next level, I guess?
Yeah, no, I always kind of believed in myself. There's definitely moments where
I know
as
we
as
know.
as a kid, who had been around a lot of basketball, there's times where you doubt yourself when you kind of see a kid that is next level, and you think I don't know if I can match that. But I remember being in 7th grade and just kind of going to we'd go to Kansas City and playing tournaments, and there was kids that had dads that played in the NBA and things like that. And, I remember kind of thinking to myself, I'm just as good or maybe better than these dudes, and just kind of I always in the back of my mind I would think I put more time in than these kids, so I deserve to believe in it. But there was definitely times when I was a sophomore and junior in high school and kids I was playing with were getting a lot of offers, and it kind of was moving a little slower for me, and thinking, man, maybe I'm not, maybe it's not going to happen.
Where it's enjoyable to watch because you're a confident guy. How do you know where to draw that line when you're playing? Because you're also a good dude, so I know you don't want to come off as maybe an asshole, but you're also a confident guy too.
Yeah, no, I think the confidence just comes from putting in a lot of time, really, and I just always I try to where that line gets drawn, I just try to think there's probably a little kid watching, you don't want him to go and be in the 3rd grade basketball tournament and just do something I did, and his parents get mad or something like that. But that's kind of what I think of when I think of stuff like that. But I think a lot of the excitement and joy I play with just comes from all that time you put in. You deserve to enjoy it and be happy. And there's definitely moments where the confidence is not there. So when it comes back, it's always a great feeling.
Being who I am, I got to carve out a little window here to talk about Mound City football. Just talk to me about that era. And I know you didn't get to finish the way you probably wanted to, but just about that program and that time spent, just all that winning.
Yeah, no, it was. And I remember, my dad, obviously, we loved football too, so he took me to a bunch of those games, like when they were 2010, when they would play at the Rams arena for the state title game. So I went down there when I was a little kid and watched it, and I loved football for a long time. And when I got to even 8th grade, and they were kind of on the cusp of being good, I remember my friends were like Landon was a freshman, and we were friends, and we kind of talked. We were like, we're going to be really good next year. And then, we got there, I got there, and it was mind boggling how good of players we had. And I think the biggest thing was, there's a lot of good players in the area, but we had 13 guys that could play for most teams, and that was the big thing. And then, those seniors when I was a freshman were unbelievable to watch, like Dylan Mars and Matthew Papa. Those guys would make plays that I just couldn't believe most of the time. And I always tell people, my job when I was the quarterback was super easy because I just had to turn and hand it to Landon. He was gonna whatever play, whatever we needed done, he was gonna get done.
How many plays did you actually have?
I'd guess about 8, really, if we're gonna be honest.
Really? I thought it would be more, honestly, because I've always heard 3, and I'm like, well, it can't just be 3.
Yeah, the three main ones, and then we'd mix in some powers to both sides, and I always just wanted to throw the ball, but we were smart enough to realize get the best player on the field the ball.
Could you throw? Can you throw the ball well?
That's probably the only thing I really could do well for us was air it out a little bit, but we didn't really quite need to.
Yeah, no, you didn't.
Not at all.
So what was practice like then? Is it just practicing your same stuff, just in seeing different fronts?
Yeah, no, and I think that was part of why we were so good is that your defense, you could have 3 or 4 guys over there that play a lot. They just might not play on the offense or stuff like that, and so they were giving us a look. And my freshman year when I was the scout team quarterback, I just remember being deathly afraid of those guys over there and just hoping I was not going to have to run or they weren't going to tackle me, things like that. But yeah, it's just kind of we kind of just would get in the wing tee a little bit or whatever you call it, and we would work on carrying out fakes and things like that. It was a lot of just trying to perfect what we were going to be good at.
Yeah. Was there ever a time where football was your favorite?
I remember coming home in 7th grade and telling my dad, I think I like football more. And then I quickly decided probably after 2 or 3 games, I don't like football more.
Yeah. And then the success, in high school basketball, you had some amazing games. The one that stands out to me, unfortunately, I didn't even get to see it, was you and Aiden Gladstone. Was that the same 62-point game, or was that a different one?
I believe it was the 62. He had a bunch at the game too.
Yeah, just walk me through. Every year and every game, but high school basketball and those matchups with Worth County, with Platte Valley. What stands out to you from that time in your life?
Yeah, just I think how much fun it was. Just my friends. Being there with those guys that I had played with since we were in 3rd grade. We all started playing together and spent a lot of time. And then when I was a freshman, I just remember thinking how cool it was that I'm playing with the seniors that I watched when they were sophomores and juniors, and kind of idolized those guys. And really just I think how good basketball was in our area at that time. I think that was probably the best it had been in a long time because there was multiple teams with multiple good players that won a bunch of games, and it was fun to watch even if we weren't playing. I was trying to go watch the games and things like that. And just really I think the thing that stands out to me is how much fun I had with my teammates and just how enjoyable that whole process was.
Was there a team you liked least?
I just think Jefferson, they were always, they were always going to be incredible, and they were going to have 6, 7, or 8 guys that, could handle the ball and score and just play their role. And, Tim Germain's the most legendary coach in our area. And, he was always going to have them ready and be super well coached. And they were hard to beat.
I'm sure your dad loves hearing that.
Yeah, I mean, he loves Tim. He's always talking about how great of a coach Tim was, and you can't. It's hard to argue because he did so much winning.
So, we kind of talked about you and your dad and growing up with a coach, and you said high school it kind of things smoothed out. Was this is that all you guys? When you're at home with him, is it all basketball? Did you guys kind of cut that off after like practice and stuff like that?
Yeah, when I got to high school, we did a great job of leaving it at the gym. Like it was, that stayed at the gym, and we were just, a normal family. But a lot of our conversations at home, even with my sister and my mom, are sports related. It just didn't always have to be about basketball at that time. But a lot of the conversations are sports related, whether it's the Royals or the NFL, things like that.
Yeah. And then I guess we can get to Omaha. What was it about that school that made you want to go there?
Yeah, so they were really I wanted to go to North Dakota State that summer, my senior year, and we went on a visit there, and it was great. And my during AAU, we were in Atlanta, and I got a concussion and I was hurt. I was done for the summer, and I remember calling North Dakota State and saying like, if you guys offer me, I'm ready to commit right now. And they're like, well, we don't know yet. That's a little injury scares us a little bit, and then Omaha, probably 2 weeks later offered me, and right as they were the first offer, I kind of made up my mind. They were the most loyal to me and showed that they wanted me the most. So that's where I'm going to go. And then North Dakota State offered that same night, so it kind of was one of those things. And I still went on visits to both places and things like that. And then the coaches I committed to and signed to at Omaha, they got fired right after my high school basketball season and the college season. And then my mom was nervous. We're going to have to find a new place to go. Who knows what the new staff's going to be like. And, Coach Crutchfield came up to Mound City and, sat in my mom's classroom and talked to my whole family. And, I had made up in my mind right there that I was going to stay, with this guy. And, my freshman year is a little off just because we hadn't really built a great relationship, just not, going through the recruiting process with him. And then ever since then, people ask me why didn't I transfer after last year, having a little success. It was an easy decision to come back for a dude that took a chance on me that, just wanted me to stay in Omaha.
We can get into that a little bit, actually. What has that experience been like for you? Because there's, that NIL transfer thing really started when you got to school. So what's it like as a player, even if you're staying, but to know your teammates could easily be gone the next year? What's that experience been like?
Yeah, I think it's very rare, for because we're in the kind of the first era of it is just when your games are winding down. I remember my sophomore year, I had best friends that I knew that they were going to leave after the last couple games, and just kind of you try not to get emotional because you got basketball left to play, but you're sitting in the locker room and it kind of hits you. This is probably the last time I'm going to be sitting in the locker room with these guys, and it's a sad feeling, but you just be grateful. And some cases it's really good for them. Like my two teammates last year that went to LSU and Baylor, like they graduated from Omaha, they did it right, and they just got a fifth year because of the JUCO rule, and they got to go make a lot of money, and they put Omaha basketball on the map, so it's perfect. But it's definitely sad at moments when you're not gonna play with guys you spend every day with that whole year.
Is that, and maybe not with you guys, but have you heard of issues with the money? Like,
everywhere, there's people, those I've had AAU teammates even who they go places because they're promised this amount, and it just doesn't always happen really, that's everywhere.
Oh, so they're not getting paid. I was more thinking like, your teammate A is mad that teammate B is making this much money.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely relevant too. There's things all over, they tell you you're going to make, just if you go to a random school, a couple $100,000, you don't end up with that. It's a big deal. Guys will try to not practice and things like that. But we've never had any problems with that here. And I think that's kind of, why we've had success is there's no jealousy in our program and things like that.
Yeah. How do you maneuver that as a college athlete? Because you're still a kid. How do you maneuver that part? Or I guess even college in general. How did that work for you going from small town Mound City to university, and plus you add on all of that?
Yeah, so I really when I got there, I wasn't worried about any of the NIL or things like that. That wasn't a big deal to me. I was just happy to be getting my school paid for and being a college basketball player. But it was definitely odd that first night it sunk in. I had to go a day after state track, so we finished state track and I had to come up to school. So. And I remember, staying the first night by myself thinking, man, this is not, I'm homesick already. And, I'm not very far from home and I'm already homesick. And, I was that definitely, was a phase of again. And I just got used to it, but it was definitely an adjustment to be in a city after coming from a small town.
Had to help being on the basketball team.
Yeah. You got built-in friends when you're on the basketball team. You get to be around people. You don't have to go out and, make friends. You got your teammates that are right there with you, and the coaches care for you and check on you. So that makes it a lot easier.
How is the adjustment to the college level, the game itself for you? You said freshman year was, and I think most people would expect most freshmen are going to struggle if they even play, that year. So what has that adjustment been like for you?
Yeah. So my thing I think I did best that year was I had realistic expectations for myself. It wasn't like I think I'm going to come in and be the best player. I wanted to come in and have a role. That was my thing. And then as the fall went along, I was like, man, I can work myself in the starting lineup, things like that. But your freshman year, you just go from being you're the guy in high school, and you get there, and you work your way up, and it's hard because you're taking all those shots and in high school, and you're gonna make some to where your role is you might get 3 shots a night, and you go for 3, you're looking at the box score like, man, I had 0 points, like. And then I think what was big for me is finally at some point, I realized I could play a role without scoring right now. Like, that's not, I just got to accept that. And and part of the problem I think I had to was comparing myself to other freshmen, whether it was my AAU teammates who were having great years, or guys in our conference who were going to win freshman of the year. I tried, like, man, I don't have that success that they're having. But, after a while, you just kind of got to be content with yourself, and be happy in that role you're playing.
You've mentioned that, and I know it's kind of off topic now, but you've mentioned that twice. And from the outside, I was never an AAU level player, but you don't really hear great things about that. Is it mostly a few stories here and there, or is AAU really does it need some fixing?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure it does need some fixing, but I had a great experience with my AAU team, so it wasn't ever a problem with me. The thing I hated the most was just traveling every weekend. I was by the end of the summer, I was ready for a little break, or things like that. But I'm sure many places have problems, and there's problems because you see guys playing for a different team every weekend, things like that, and
Mm.
there's a lot of craziness that comes with it, but it does a great job of at least for me, put me on a platform where I could, coaches are going to be in the row watching your teams and yourself, and give you a chance to get noticed.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. And then so sophomore, junior year, what changed after that first year?
I think just really knowing what it was like. I didn't walk into practice, wonder what's going on today. I had done it, or walk into the college game and wonder what's it gonna be like. I had done it, and I think the benefit, we weren't very good when I was a freshman because everybody was first. We had just brought in a whole new team, a whole new coaching staff, but in that time, all our young guys had to play, and we got thrown into the fire, and it was hard, but that was part of the success, and reason we had success last year was because that was all the guys that were the first. They had been thrown into the fire, and those were the guys that had to play and were used to it. But my junior year, I just came in, and I spent a lot of time in the gym, and it was I'm a junior now. It's time to have a little more confidence, and that type of thing, and just really knowing what's coming is the easiest part now.
I like to ask this too as well. It's a little different because you're still a young guy. Mostly get it from coaches, but what advice do you have for young basketball players that want to do what you have done and get to that high school level?
Yeah, I think it's just really just spending a lot of time in the gym. I think especially for the kids in the area too, there's not a bunch that spend a lot of time in the gym, and that was kind of how I separated myself. Was I spent a lot of time, and I always tell kids when they come to my camps or whatever, I was spending almost every day in there. You don't have to spend every day in the gym. You can go 3 times a week, and you're going to separate yourself from the kids in the 275 conference or the GRC, really things like that. But I think that's the biggest thing I always tell them is there's no secret to it. You just if you spend time, you're going to get better at it. And my thing my parents did that made me the best was they got me out of Northwest Missouri, and I had to expand and go to Kansas City and go to Omaha and Lincoln, things like that. And at times it was I was really failing at it. It's your eyes are getting wide, and things like that. And that's part of the success is failing first. So that's my really advice for kids that are trying to be good basketball players.
Yeah, and I remember what I was going to ask you. At that college level, it's still a basketball court. The rim's still the same. What's the most challenging part for kids? In your eyes, when you can't when players aren't able to transition, what is that? what happens, I guess, is or what have you seen that doesn't click, I guess?
Really, just kind of like I said about how I tried to buy into a role my freshman year is, a lot of guys coming in, they're not realistic with themselves. They're thinking, this going to be my team. I'm going to take over. And I've had some teammates that are ultra talented and they can't buy into the role or see it in other places. Kids I've played with in AAU, things like that. They're ultra talented and they go to a place and they can't buy in a role. And most of the time, I think it's for me, it's easy to tell in that first month of being a teammate with a kid, if he's going to buy it or not. And then, there's guys who have, battled through injury and weren't overly highly recruited and they're just, happy to be there and they're going to do whatever it takes to win. And those are the guys that, the coaches are going to believe in and trust to go on the floor and help him win.
Yeah. And, I don't want to make you grow up too fast, but, what do you want to do? What's post-college life hopefully like for you?
Yeah, I want to go to Europe and keep playing. I've got a lot of teammates that play over there and things like that. But I always tell my parents I don't want to go over there and come back and I've played.
The guy that was homesick in Omaha wants to go to Europe, huh?
Exactly. And I don't want to come back and my body be so beat up I can't move around anymore. So just playing, but knowing when to shut it down, really. And then after that, I've tried to say I'm gonna help my dad farm, and he says, play as long as you can. The farm's always going to be there, things like that. So,
really,
yeah,
all that, and you're just going to come back to farm in Mound City?
Come back and be a farmer.
Are you going to be Mound City's basketball coach too?
If they need me to help, I would gladly do that. That would be a blast, and just being around the game is always going to be there for me. I hope.
Your sister though, she better than you?
No, she's not. But she's making her own way in volleyball, and it's fun to watch, and I'm proud of her. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, man, I appreciate this. You're just as good a dude as you are a basketball player, and I wish you nothing but the best moving forward. So it's always good talking to you.
Yes, thank you very much for having me.